When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Rereading YouTube channel. Today's video will be continuing on our Song of Ice and Fire reread, and we are going to be doing Catelyn 5 in today's video. This is a very impactful chapter for Catelyn. It kind of feels like this mid-book kind of arc for Catelyn. It's like kind of we're getting kind of closer to the halfway point of the first book. I mean, this is really where everything that's been set up by George with Catelyn's storyline and Bran's storyline really comes to a threshold. We're going to see a lot of things happen, and by the end of it, Catelyn is going to capture Tyrion. There's a lot of great stuff with Catelyn's chapter in this one. A lot of her remembering her childhood, and also it gives us a little bit more of an insight into Catelyn's thoughts on the coming war that's possibly going to happen and what she is going to do. And again, something I think that we need to think about and have in the back of our heads going into this chapter is we haven't seen Catelyn in a little while, because again, they have been traveling from King's Landing for a little bit. The last time we saw Catelyn with Ned had given her a set instructions on how to prepare the North for war. And that's what he told her to do. So I want you guys to remember that as we go forward with this chapter, because we know as the audience or people that have already read the story that she's not going to do that. So we're going to try to rationalize why Catelyn takes the action she does in this chapter, when maybe logic from us as a outside viewer or reader tells us she shouldn't be doing these things. Well, why does she do them? And understanding why Catelyn is such an interesting and human character. But that's going to start us off on page 283 to begin the chapter. Now, like I had said, Roderick and Catelyn have been heading back north. They are caught in a rain, and Catelyn does not mind it necessarily. Roderick is not faring well with this rain, but Catelyn kind of thinks about a couple things here. It reminds her of her youth at Riverrun with her siblings and Littlefinger. It again shows us kind of how close Littlefinger was to their family early on. It kind of is indicative of showing how Littlefinger got into such a powerful position. He made friends with a lot of important people. And again, I think that what's interesting here, something I talked about with my Littlefinger video, is I think we are given a lot of information as to why Littlefinger takes revenge and why he has the motivations he does. But this is something that's very subtle from George. But in this moment where she's thinking about her childhood, she notes how they actually picked on Littlefinger, that her and Lysa had made a joke of serving him up mud pies until he was sick for a week. So again, it kind of plays into this idea that I really think Littlefinger was like this person that was, yes, a friend, but he was kind of the butt of all the jokes. He was someone that was lower class. He was not as, rich as them. So this is where I'm going to kind of pair this to. If we look at something like Harry Potter, right, we'll see that Wormtail, of the four main marauders, was the one that was kind of like pushed out. Like he wasn't really like as tight as the others. Kind of how I feel a little bit about Littlefinger in this situation and why he kind of grew up that way and becomes the person that he is. Catelyn notes how much the North is different than the South, as a rain here is just, well, a rain. And in the North, it can quickly turn to ice and would kill crops just as much as grow them, which is, again, an interesting idea that the South doesn't really understand hard living like someone in the North. That's something even Catelyn is kind of latching onto. She's been living in the North for a very long time. And it's something that's going to be really interesting when we see Catelyn and, say, a character like Renly, and when he's got his whole camp in the second book. It'll be something that's interesting to play on, is how much Catelyn has transformed herself. But that gets us into page 284. So Roderick complains of being soaked and that they will need a fire and food tonight, to which Catelyn notes there is an inn nearby at the crossroads, and she remembers her youth once again going there and getting sweets and cakes. Again, this is something that's very interesting, because Catelyn is someone that presumably didn't have to pay for these cakes, didn't have to pay for these sweets, and she was very young, so you wouldn't think she would, but it seems like Catelyn is someone that maybe doesn't really understand why she got those treats. It wasn't because of, oh, this person just being very kind. It was because you wanted to be looked at very fondly from a very powerful house. That's something that's going to come back later, and I think it's something that's interesting to note right then. But I think something that's interesting as well is that Catelyn kind of seems like she's kind of thrown caution to the wind. Like, When she was going to King's Landing, yes, she wasn't making the best decisions to keep her and Roderick hidden, but she's kind of even gotten even further away from that. Like, the Crossroad Inns is not an unpopular place. It's in the very center of all of these roads. It's a very popular hub, and as we're going to see, like, they're basically sold out on betting. And when you see all of these tourney nights coming and all of these people being drawn south, it's a wonder that Catelyn actually goes there. And we're going to understand what Catelyn's rationale is here, but I don't think it's good, especially when you're Catelyn. You do not want to be seen. And Roderick kind of reads my thoughts when I'm talking about that. He's like, is that kind of wise? Don't you want to stay hidden? They should not go there, and they should look for more of a smaller holdfast where, you know, they won't be likely noticed. Which, again, honestly, even from that, if you really wanted to stay hidden, you wouldn't go to a holdfast. You wouldn't go to, an inn. You would really just camp in the wildlife. Now, I know that that's something where it's like, Catelyn Stark is this really highborn woman. She doesn't want to have to do those things, but that's kind of the price for doing a very incognito mission. And Catelyn is not the best person at, like, keeping her identity kind of a secret and not giving people hints as to who she is. But at this moment, horses are heard, and Roderick goes to his sword, and Catelyn notes that you can never be too wary on the road. And this is, again, more foreshadowing, as when we see the war break out, this is only going to get amplified. And it's something that I think is really reminiscent through all points of history, not even just Westeros, but even our own history. In times of war and stuff like that, it invokes violence, it invokes bandits, things of that nature. Roderick tells her to put her hood up, to which she does not, and then notes that this is the Mallisters on their way to the Hand's tourney. She even sees Lord Jason Mallister and Patrick Mallister, his son. Again, Catelyn is not cautious here at all. She's willing to keep her hood up. Yes, maybe Jason Mallister doesn't recognize her at first, and maybe he wouldn't recognize her at all, but it just seems like Catelyn is choosing on every turn to not be cautious. It's more like Roderick is giving her a cautious thing. He doesn't believe that maybe they're going to instantly recognize her, but it's more the idea that why take the risk? I think it's just a very odd thing by Catelyn. Catelyn even notes that the roads have been full of knights and others moving south for the tourney, which is kind of what we talked about. It's what we kind of looked at with, like, the last Ned chapter. They talked about how there's going to be more traffic in the city. The city watch is having trouble with all these people coming in. So again, this fits perfectly into what we've been told. Catelyn notes that the Mallisters are sworn to the Tullys, and she looks at Jason Mallister, noting the last time she saw him was at her wedding. He is much older now, but he still had that same pride and fear of nothing. Jason then politely nods at her, but says nothing and does not recognize her, which, again, makes sense, right? It has been a while since he's seen her. And also the other thing, I think this is the key point, is that they are two people that are traveling in a very small party. They would probably look like just random travelers or farmers, low-born people. So again, I get that Catelyn is right that they weren't recognized, but it's, again, just taking those precautions that she's just not doing, and it's something that's going to lead her to be very overconfident and go to the inn saying that, oh, well, Jason Mallister didn't know who I am, so none of these people will. It's very different, the circumstances. Catelyn and Roderick being in an inn shows that, A, they can pay for it, and also you're going to have people being much more closer up to them and looking at them and interacting with them, and that's exactly what gets them into trouble. So I think this is something that is very interesting to point out. But Cat, again, thinks at this point that they should go to the inn. It should be safe. If Lord Mallister did not recognize her, again, there probably wouldn't be many other people that would. Again, I disagree with this concept. It's just a risk that I don't think Catelyn should be making, but she decides to do it anyway. And another thing I think is interesting is that it's raining right now. It's muddy. This is not like it's a sunny day, right? All of these travelers are going to be not looking great. When Catelyn cleans up and Roger cleans up, they're going to look like two different people. They're going to look much more prestige, I guess. But I understand that Catelyn does think, and logically, right? If we're going off of odds, the odds of them being recognized is probably pretty low. But it's the idea of secrecy. Do you want this to be really secret? But by nightfall, they eventually do reach the inn, and they are told that there's only one room left below the bell for dinner. Again, showing that this inn is very populated. There's a lot of people coming by. So again, there are some risks here with Catelyn staying here. They take it, but Catelyn notes that the woman she used to know that ran the place was much older and not nearly as nice. Again, it's the idea of how people will treat highborns compared to common people. Highborns, treating them nicely can get you favors. It can get you prestige. They can get you to come back more. It makes more sense, right? That's something we see with like Ned with the armor in the last Ned chapter we looked at. Catelyn switches into warm clothes and thinks about the road. She sees the trident and thinks if she goes west, it'll be an easy road to her home River Run. And again, this is something I noted, but Catelyn is kind of already forgetting about what she promised Ned and what he wanted her to do. She's already thinking of detours. She's also going to think of the Vale and going to see her sister as well. So again, from a logical point of view, looking out from the outside, looking in, we see this as Catelyn. Why are you thinking about this? But when we go from a character point of view, Catelyn is someone that has not been home in years. She has not seen her sister or even been to the Vale in years. This is someone that misses her family. Hoster Tully is someone that is not in a good state right now. He's been bedridden, and Edmure Tully has basically been the new lord at this point. There's a lot of reasons for why Catelyn would want to go to River Run, and Catelyn does bring up a good point in my opinion. But this is something we need to hold on for when things happen at the end of the chapter. But Catelyn thinks that they should warn River Run. If the North is getting prepared, so should the Riverlands. And that's even more apparent because the Riverlands share a border with the Lannisters, with the West. They will be the first to be attacked. So again, Catelyn does rationalize this in her head and make some decent claims, but it's a lot of them that are based on emotion, excuses of why I should go to River Run, when in reality, she really just needs to get north up to her children that need her and also to prepare the North. Also, sorry for the blurry image for this next one. Again, finding decent pictures for this chapter was not the easiest thing to do, but moving on. Catelyn again is trying to rationalize going to warn her father of war and all of that, like I kind of talked about. And at this moment, she then kind of shifts to the Eastern Passage that they are kind of currently at. But again, the Vale is something that's very hard to get through, especially without a large army or a large force around you. It's very tough. We also get the idea that the Eyrie is impregnable. But this again brings up an interesting idea because Catelyn then thinks about, well, if she went to see Lysa, she could find some answers. She could maybe find evidence that Ned is needing. But my question here is, if that was true, why hadn't Lysa supplied that to Ned already? That should be another warning flag of, this doesn't really add up. This doesn't really make sense. If Lysa wants to get the Lannisters back or something like that, why is she not helping Ned at all? It's an interesting little point there. Cat also thinks that if it did come to war, they will need the Arryns to the east as well, which is again true. But I don't think the Catelyn is trying to find reasons to go see her family when in reality these aren't really good reasons compared to what she should be doing. But Cat kind of shuts this down in her mind because again, it's basically impossible. There are shadow cats and mountain clans all over the way to the Eyrie, and that way you really need a lot of strength. Even the great Lord Jon Arryn, when he left or went back to the Eyrie, he always had a strong garrison with him. Catelyn thinks that all this must wait, and she must go north, as that is her duty, which again, it's kind of this idea that Catelyn is kind of having this constant battle in her head with emotion and logic. It's something we see that certain times logic gets through and sometimes emotion gets through. And usually the emotional part comes when it's close to herself or her family. When it comes to things that are not, like say Stannis and Renly, when they are having their issues and Catelyn is kind of our voice of reason, she's more logical. So again, I think there's a lot of that being played here where Catelyn is constantly battling with the emotions of herself, which I think is very human, and it's something that's great about Catelyn's POVs. And again, as she says, as soon as she crosses the neck, she plans to announce herself and to warn the North and have the King's Road watched. Again, which is exactly what she should be doing. She thinks again about the roads and places surrounding the area like the Stony Sept and the Trident, And this is going to foreshadow a little bit later when she's kind of talking about the loyalties of her bannermen and getting them to arrest Tyrion. She's going to go a little bit into the geography and some of the houses within the Riverlands in the next page. But that gets us into page 287. Catelyn thinks of the other houses in the Riverlands, the Blackwoods and the Brackens and their rivalry, the quarreling her father has always had to settle, Lady Went, who ruled the ruinous castle of Harrenhal, the Freys and Walder Frey, who has outlived 7 wives and had filled a castle with his family. Catelyn then thinks of others that has not supported them in Robert's rebellion, like the Mootons, the Darys, and the Rygers. Now again, this paints something that's very interesting here. Old loyalties, will those come into effect later on in the story? How will that play out? Will these houses support the Tullys if it came to war? It's interesting. And we even think about how that's going to affect when, say, Dany or young Griff comes over. Will these be houses that could possibly try and swing to young Griff or Dany's cause instead? But I think it's interesting the way we look at Robert's Rebellion and how there was a really interesting ideological difference that people probably had. Do you support your paramount lord, so the Tullys in this situation, or do you follow your king? And this is something that, for instance, Stannis kind of dealt with, where it was like Stannis, it was like, do I go with my brother, family, or do I go with the king? So again, a tough situation, and it shows kind of that issues with the people that didn't go for Robert's Rebellion. Another thing to note is that when the Freys showed up to the Trident, they were late, and there are rumors of who they actually meant to side with. Walder says it was the rebels, but after this moment, Hoster began calling him the late Walder Frey. So again, this is already going to set up one thing. That Walder Frey is this character that has very mixed loyalties. He is someone that has been kind of made fun of by the Tullys. All of this is great setup for actions Walder Frey is going to take later without even introducing us into Walder Frey. This is just some great writing by George to foreshadow books to come. Catelyn then thinks it must not come to war. But again, I want you guys to remember, this line is very contradictory to what Catelyn is going to do in this chapter. Because inherently, Catelyn is trying to think, well, I don't want war to happen. I don't want my family to be put at risk, to have to, worry about them going off to war and all this stuff. And think about it like this. Ned is in King's Landing, so he is in a very precarious situation if war was to break out. Roderick then tells her they should go down to eat, and Catelyn tells him to not call her a lady and that they should play the role of her father. Which, I mean, obviously, you can't go down calling her a lady. It's just going to set off all the alarms. So again, just logical. I don't really understand why this hasn't been brought up until now. I would have thought Roderick, shouldn't be calling her lady in general. But again, makes sense. Cat then takes his arm, and the two descend to dinner. And that gets us into page 288. So moving on, Catelyn notes that the hall is crowded with many different people: blacksmiths, farmers, travelers, and swordsmen. Catelyn notes that there are 3 Bracken men here and a large number of Freys. At this moment, they meet a singer who wishes them well. Roderick calls for food and drink, and the singer begins to question them on a number of things, like where they came from and what news they had. Catelyn answers that they had just come from King's Landing, which again is something that I think is a little odd. Why even tell this guy that, right? Why just make something up that seems like it wouldn't bring as much attention? Why would you be leaving King's Landing when everyone is going to King's Landing? And then you go down a rabbit hole of making some story up. So to me, I don't think I would, if I was Catelyn, I would have even said that. The singer that we hear is a very young 18-year-old man, and he says that is where he is bound, to King's Landing, and that he's going there for the tourney. And the tourneys mean many high lords and fat purses. And he even notes the last time he was there, he had a ton of silver, but lost it gambling on Jaime. Roderick notes the gods frown on a gambler, again, showing kind of the ethics and the belief system of the North. They're not a big fan of tourneys. They don't believe in knights. They don't believe in gambling. All of these type of things that's very common in the South. And that gets us into page 289. So the singer says, yes, the gods frowned on me, and Loras Tyrell. To which Roderick said, yes, you must have learned your lesson. Singer says, yeah, he learned his lesson to bet on Loras this time. And here we see why tournaments are so important and why jousting is so great for the High Lords and Knights and even the common people. It adds a way of people earning money, and it brings a lot of revenue and puts a lot of coin in a lot of pockets. Like Littlefinger talked about. Littlefinger wasn't wrong in that idea. Like this singer here, right? He is going to get inherently a lot more wealthier because of this. And hopefully he doesn't waste all of his money. But again, that's pockets and other people's hands. It brings a lot of attention to these tournaments. And again, something I wanted to point out here, why these tourneys are so important to so many. Think about Daemon Blackfire and Baelor Breakspear. When we see that Daenerys is somebody that Daemon really liked, is marrying a Dornishman, right? We see this big idea where Daemon and Baelor, they're in the final tilts, and that's where Baelor gets his name, the Baelor Breakspear. It's so important because it sends the message that Baelor is better at Daemon in this joust, and that the marriage should go through, and it builds up Baelor's reputation. His whole nickname is based off of a little joust/tournament. Again, it shows, and it's very important to the common people. Loras Tyrell gets a lot of his influence from these tournaments. At this moment, they are interrupted by the servers bringing them food, and he goes back to get beer for them. Singer introduces himself as Merlion, and they must have heard of him. Which makes Catelyn smile, because the thing is with Catelyn, right? She's thinking about it. She's been living in the North for years. They don't get any singers. And she's going to point this out that she hasn't heard of him. But that's going to lead to a whole other different conversation. But Catelyn then says she knew the type of this Merlion, as when she was younger at Riverrun, they got singers all of the time. Merlion says he will play a song for them for a copper, to which Roderick says he would rather throw the money down a well. Again, I think this is very similar sentiment of the North as a whole. The North really doesn't care about singers. They don't really care about tournaments. They don't care about all these things that doesn't help prevent winters coming. They don't care about stuff like that. And Roderick has this little moment, and Catelyn even notes that Roderick has this sour tone towards singers, because for Roderick, he doesn't understand why any man would ever play a harp, an instrument, instead of picking up a sword and fighting. Again, it shows you that idea that if you can't swing a sword, if you're not manly in that way, then you're no man at all. Again, playing on the idea of like what Samwell Tarly had to deal with his father, Randall. Merlion then turns to Cat, noting that Roderick has a sour tone, but he actually wanted to sing of her beauty. And even though his songs are made to be heard by kings and high lords, that he will play for her. But Catelyn kind of sees through this. She knows that this is flattery, but she also kind of plays with it a little bit. She says, "You must have played for Lord Tully then." And to which he says, "Hundreds of times. They have a room for him, and Edmure is a brother to him." Which is obviously bullshit, because Catelyn even thinks that Edmure hates singers after one of the singers seduced a woman he fancied. So again, singers, maybe not the most reliable source. And a lot of people in this world are they talk out of their ass. Merlion is one of those people that just randomly brings up stories. She then asks if he has ever traveled north to Winterfell before, which is an interesting question, because again, if you're trying to stay incognito here, probably not a great question, because like what commoner would just randomly bring up Winterfell? It is something that where it's like, if Merlion was a spy for someone, that would be a line right there that would be very fishy. Merlion then says, no, why would he go up there? It's really cold. The Starks don't enjoy music, as Roderick has pointed out. And the only music that the North loves is the howling of wolves. And at this moment, someone announces that the Lord of Lannister needs a room and a fresh bath. And again, I want to put something into perspective here, right? Catelyn is someone that the last she knows is that Bran was nearly killed by a dagger that was Tyrion's. We've talked about in the past why that really doesn't make a lot of sense logically when you look at it. But Catelyn fully trusts Littlefinger. So you now have this person that's just walked into the room that you believe is Bran's killer. He's in a vulnerable position where you could capture him. I see why Catelyn is thinking this and why she does this risky play, but she's not thinking about unselfish reasons. She's thinking very selfishly here. She's letting her emotion win in this situation, and that's something I'm going to talk about as the chapter progresses. Catelyn and Roderick are very surprised to hear this. Again, they're trying to stay incognito, and Tyrion, unfortunately for them, is one of the few people that would be able to unmask Catelyn. And the innkeep says there are no rooms free, and this really is not a problem for Tyrion. Again, Tyrion is rich. We're going to see how people of high birth are able to get things when they're rich, especially. Tyrion says his companions will not need rooms, but he himself is not large, and he does not require a large room. To which, again, the innkeep says there are no rooms. This prompts Tyrion to hold up and toss a gold coin, and right away someone says he can have his room. And Tyrion asks for food to be provided for them, and at this moment, Catelyn hopes he chokes on it, and just imagines Bran choking and dying, again, showing her emotion that will set in motion her decision. So again, Catelyn right now is thinking about Bran. She's highly emotional. She's not thinking clearly, and this is a recipe for disaster. Tyrion then asks Yoren to sup with him, and he agrees to, leading us into page 291. And we're going to kick off one of the biggest plot points in the entire first book. Catelyn was happy to know that he had not even glanced in their direction, until Marillion, of course, stands up and asks to play for him while they sup and play the Victory of Tywin's at King's Landing, to which Tyrion notes that nothing would displease him more. Again, it shows us a lot about Tyrion and Tywin's relationship without actually seeing the two together, which is really great. It's a nice little line there that just helps build on that. But this draws his attention to Catelyn. Tyrion for a moment looks at her and then announces, "Lady Stark, what an unexpected surprise," and he was sorry to miss her at Winterfell. Catelyn then stands saying that the last time she stayed here, she was Catelyn Tully. And at this moment, there is no time to think. As she looks around the room, it is worth taking the risk. Now, us, the reader, we're not sure what the risk is yet, but this is not worth the risk. Catelyn is going to openly kidnap Tyrion, and what is this going to cause? She's been thinking here, well, I can't start a war. I need to help Ned in the north. I need to do my duty. And she abandons that in one swift stroke. But at this point, I also want to just think about what Catelyn's doing here. She's, again, putting the Catelyn Stark name away and going to the Catelyn Tully name. She's going to play, again, on the loyalties of these people that are loyal to the Tullys. She looks to a man with a sigil with a bat on it of Harrenhal and asks if that is true. The man says it is. Catelyn asks if Lady Went is an honest friend to Lord Tully, to which the man says she is. Catelyn turns to the three men she saw earlier that were from House Bracken and says that Lord Tully always counted Lord Bracken as one of his closest friends and most loyal bannermen. Again, this kind of all seems out of the blue. And even Tyrion, who is as cunning and as smart as he is, doesn't really put together what's going on yet. And this is a very odd statement to say that, you know, like, oh yeah, these Bracken men, your lord is one of my closest friends of my father. It's just a really weird statement. And even the men of these Bracken men like question it and kind of confusingly say that their lord is honored by this trust. Like, they don't know what to say to this. And Tyrion pipes up saying that he envies Catelyn's father and all his friends, but does not really see the point. Again, we as the reader are right here with Tyrion. We're not sure what she's planning yet. We then see as Catelyn ignores Tyrion, and she thinks that the Frey men were the ones who truly mattered. And this is interesting. Think about the foreshadowing that's going on here. The Freys are pivotal in Robb's march south. They're pivotal to his campaign, and everything that's going to hinge on it is going to hinge on this large group of Frey men. She says she knows their sigil too, the twin towers of Frey, and asks how Walder is doing. They say he is well and is wanting to take another wife on his 90th name day. He requests Lord Tully's presence. At this moment, Tyrion openly laughs, and Catelyn notes that she has him. She says that Tyrion came into her house and plotted to kill her son Bran. She calls them in the name of Robert Baratheon and the lords they serve to seize this man and bring him to justice in Winterfell. Catelyn notes her victory as she doesn't know what she's pleased by more, the sound of swords being drawn or the shock and defeat on Tyrion's face. And that ends the chapter, but I want to think about this logically from a bystander's point of view. What does this do? One, she is openly kidnapping Tyrion Lannister, a rival of your house. Tywin Lannister obviously is not going to accept this and is going to fully start raiding the Riverlands because of this event. Catelyn quite literally causes a war to start with this action, when in the same chapter she said she wanted to avoid it at all costs. But in this moment, her emotion, like so many times it will in the story, overcomes her. And something else that you have to think about is, two, she's also not preparing the North for war either. They're not going to be able to start preparing as early as they need to. Catelyn quite literally does the opposite of what Ned wants her to do. Ned wants her to help build up the North's defenses, get them prepared, and tell the North basically that, we are on the brink of war. What does she do? She doesn't prepare the North and equally starts a war, and then also puts Ned in a horrible position where he has to take accountability for Catelyn's actions, which puts him in the crosshairs of characters like Cersei and Jaime. It's just a bad move in so many ways. Like, we do see Catelyn's cunning to even have Tyrion captured here. Like, it was a good manipulation of these and kind of reading the room, but it just doesn't make any sense from a logical point of view. An emotional point of view, yes. When you look at it from where Catelyn is standing, she believes this man is a horrible person that tried to kill an innocent child. But in the end, Catelyn is the person that really starts the plot to start going. And she just makes an error, in my opinion. It's one of the reasons I love Catelyn's POVs. She isn't a character I inherently like. She's a character I, enjoy the most, but she's someone that's very human. She is someone that is probably the closest to a normal human being that you can be. She's someone that's highly emotional. She's someone that, when it comes to her family, she makes rash decisions. And I really enjoy this chapter. It's one of my favorite chapters of the first part of the book. And yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed this chapter, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.